All right, well, I think we should get started giving, this is a 30-minute power show. David and Sherry, are you ready?
Yes, definitely. We're looking forward to this.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This session is being recorded, so if some of your colleagues can't join us, if they registered, they will get a copy, as you will too. And without further ado, welcome to our first inaugural CS Makeover Show. I'm really excited to be hosting this series on a monthly cadence over the course of the next year. And if you haven't checked out our new website, Simplifying CS, please sign up to receive monthly updates. We will be posting there not only blogs leading up to our next guests, but different resources like the ones that David and Sherrod have shared with us from GitLab today. So I'm looking forward to all of your questions. This will be an interactive session over the next 30 minutes, and we will also share resources after the event. So thank you for joining us. And last but not least, there will be a survey at the end. So tell us what you want more of, what you want less of. There wouldn't be a true CS show without surveying your customers, right? So this show is for you, and I can't think of two better guests to host today than David Sakamoto, the Vice President of Customer Success, and Sherrod Patching, the Head of Global Technical Account Managers at GitLab. And for those of you that don't know what GitLab is or does, it is a collaboration platform that's open sourced and an open source Git repository. It is valued at over $6 billion and has been not only a unicorn, but companies like Alphabet's Google Ventures, Khosla Ventures, and Iconic Ventures have invested in this incredible company. The other great thing you should know about this company is they do not have an office. They never have. And if you want to send them a letter, you have to send it to a PO box in San Francisco, where most of us lived at least at some point, and I believe David still does. They've also been recognized by Forbes and many other organizations as one of the best places to work. So without further ado, David and Sherrod, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Amelia. We're really excited to join. Thanks for everybody. It's great to see people from Paris and San Diego, all over the world, in Bangalore on the webinar. So thank you all for joining.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get started. So just like if anyone has ever gone through a house renovation, if you have, let us know in the chat box. It is can be maybe a nightmare. You might be fighting with your partner and maybe wishing or saying, uh-oh, what have I gotten myself into? So like that, it is also an amazing time to really look at your floor plan, your foundation, and really get things right the way you believe you will be happy for a long time living in that dwelling. And so that's what we're going to focus on today, and really focus on the enterprise onboarding, because I've been saying this for a long time in many of the articles I've written. Onboarding is the beginning of churn or massive growth. And so let's talk, and I'm going to start with David, learning about the foundation, or when you joined in 2019 at GitLab, what was it like in terms of people, process, and systems?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amelia. So I joined right as we were embarking on a very large scaling effort that ultimately resulted in us scaling the customer success team from 40 to around 140 in a very rapid pace. And when I joined, we had what I would characterize, we had an account management process with very passionate people for customers, a great place to start. But it was different than a customer success management that we would want to build to. And the way that I characterize the difference in account management and customer success management is you have a lifecycle management approach. You've got an outcome-driven methodology. You have playbooks for onboarding, adoption, expansion, and you have visibility. So you see where you are from a customer health, you have metrics, you have leading indicators, not just lagging indicators. And so, there's a lot to build, especially given the growth of the business. And some of you may be looking at, oh, I'm not at a hyper growth company, but I think, Amelia, as you kind of talked about the floor plans, this applies to pretty much every leader, the need for speed per se. And it could be your business is transforming to subscription. You need to move really quickly. Or you're a new leader, you joined, and you need to show impact and results, or maybe just doing it because it's a very fast moving market and you have to be competitive in the workplace. And so when you outlook and you kind of define your North Star, there's a lot to be built, right? You have success plans and EBRs and segment specific approaches and health scores and automation and systems and connecting with product team processes. But you really have to simplify to the theme of the show and focus on what things are going to drive the most impact and results. And I'd love to, and Sharon joined the team, and I'd love to her to talk about how do you approach tackling the strategy, especially starting with onboarding when you joined.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things was, so when I arrived, we were just at the beginning of rolling out Gainsight, actually. And so one of the things that we decided to do was, rather than try and tackle everything all at once, actually take more of an iterative approach. I think we probably have all seen that you can design a process that can be fairly straightforward. You can build systems around these processes, and that's more complex, but changing a mindset, actually getting everyone to come along the journey with you, not just telling people what needs to get done and then hoping it happens, but actually coaching them and guiding them through the change of mindset, that can take time. So we slowed down the rollout of what we were going to do in the first iteration with Gainsight and also with the TAM team more broadly to really focus on the kind of the 80-20. So what's that 20% that potentially is going to have the biggest impact? So that's where we started. We started with onboarding and also with the success plans, ensuring that we were having those business outcomes focused conversations, those value conversations first and foremost, and that we had a more guided journey through our customer onboarding as a starting place.
I would really like to dig in on success plans because not everyone even knows what that means or has yet to implement it. And so I keep hearing this word. There are many different ways to describe what a success plan is, but what was so important about doing this early on in your experience at GitLab?
So the big piece about success plans for us is it is there's twofold. One is changing the conversation, right? So that's outside of a success plan. So we're having a values-based conversation with our customers instead of feature function. I mean, that is the most important thing of all, that we're engaging with them on how they're going to receive value from our platform and not just trying to sell them buttons and whistles. But the way that you quantify that and build frameworks around it is in through success plans. So we chose Gainsight to do that. And so that we can begin to see, like, yes, at a micro level, we need to have that conversation with the customer, but at a macro level, we need to be measuring, how is this working? Is this rollout being effective? How do we quantify the success of success plans through closed won objectives potentially? So the success plan is twofold. It's the conversation itself and then capturing that conversation in a quantifiable way.
So yeah. I'm curious. Go ahead, David.
I was going to add in there. No, I think the other thing is, like, when we talk about the lifecycle management approach, I think it's important to transition from the expectations from the sales process. And really what it does is, I think also in addition to what Sharon said, is it provides that roadmap. And for those that may be looking at it, what is a success plan? A simple way to think about it, think of like a project plan that you're going to collaboratively work with and get that shared agreement on what you're going to do and how you're going to progress. And what are the outcomes? What are the metrics associated with those outcomes? And then what are the use cases that you want to align the customer to adopt to achieve those outcomes? And then really collaborate with the customer to understand what their change management is to ensure you can successfully support them, whether it's enablement or services or consulting. And it's something that it's a shared plan that you can continue to iterate, because those goals and objectives, as you achieve them, will continue and evolve. And if you're doing our jobs right, they'll keep adding new ones and you can keep growing with that customer.
So I'd love to dig in on this, because as a consultant with customer success executives, they're constantly with this change management that you've been speaking to, having to get their executives, in your case, it might be the CRO, the CEO, to agree with this change management you're proposing, what elements do you include when you're going through this change management, not only to bring your team and influence them, but what about your leadership?
You want to take that one, David, and I can talk about the internal iteration, or I can take it.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the one thing I'll actually take a little bit of the customer's views of this. And the funny thing is there's an interesting problem that was pointing at the wrong root cause, right? So Shared will remember, a lot of the feedback is, and I think there's still a continuing evolving, and I think this is something that a lot of people in the market have an issue with, is I can't get the executive to show up at the EBR, or I can't get it scheduled. And a lot of times, if you're talking feature function, you're not going to get the VP or the CXO to show up there because you're talking too low level. So when Shared talked about up-leveling that conversation, I think a key thing, if you look down that journey, is to set expectations, in that artifact, that success plan can really serve as a valuable thing to make your stakeholders successful, position it internally within their organization, and get those right people to show up, because you're going to have the right conversations. And I have one that EBR that I went to fairly recently. I just talk about it all the time. Shared's going to make me stop talking about it, but the customer really at the end said, "Hey, this was so great. We'd like to kick off at the beginning of the year and do an annual plan with you so we can set our goals for the coming year." And that's absolutely the right, to me, that was the pinnacle of the right conversation that you want to have.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to pause with this interview. Now we know what the before was like. I want to get this audience involved. We're going to put up a survey or a poll, excuse me. I'd love to get everyone involved. You have a few seconds to fill it in. So what are the biggest challenges you faced when running your own onboarding programs for your premium tier customers? And if you don't have premium customers, you're a Tech Touch only company or shop, please fill in according to your own personal business. Right, we're getting some answers. And I don't know if you can see what's showing up yet on the poll, but it looks like there's some close ties. Right, we'll wait a few more seconds. All right, 8 more seconds. I'm closing the poll. All right, I'm ending the poll. Now I will share the results and share it. I'd love for you to comment. Does this surprise you? It looks like
we have some challenge. Getting customers to engage is definitely a key one.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I think, do you want me to take that one? So there's two.
Yeah.
It looks like we have the change management, which for sure is challenging. I think we've talked a little bit already today about changing mindsets internally and externally, both equally. And also getting customers to participate in, I think, onboarding specifically on this question. We actually have had some real success in rolling out kind of digital enablement topics. So sometimes we find with that transition, the customer feels like they've got it. We have quite a sticky product. And so we have found ways of adding additional value that can really trigger that conversation with the customer as a starting point. But I think the key thing is the more that we can do as CSMs or TAMs and as the CS org on helping the customer understand how we're going to get them to value, the more likely they are to engage in the onboarding, equally to things like the executive business reviews, like we were talking about.
It's like you have to set the scene for them, right? Like, what am I getting into? How much of my time am I going to have to commit? And ultimately, what's the end goal for me? Right? As humans, we're naturally selfish. I want to know what's in it for me. How do I look like a hero to my boss? Okay, well, great. I am going to close this poll and move on, because I am personally, really want to know the after. This is the CS Makeover Show, and what I think the audience is here more than anything, now that they see what situation you walked into and the opportunity that was ahead. Tell me more about what you did that really made it a success, and not only what you did, but how did you scale it?
So So in terms of rolling out the rollout approach, yeah, so I think there's a couple of key things. I saw a comment on enablement, which is really, really important because I think as Sherrod said, the changing the mindset is the part that's both the hardest part to kind of challenge and adds time, but also where you get the most value. So you want to make sure to focus on that. So we started with doing enablement at SCO, but there was a lot of underlying assets and things you want to enable a team. And maybe Sherrod, I think this is something you led, so I'd love for you to just talk through it, like the discovery questions and also getting the feedback from the team. Would love to share that.
Yeah, you bet. So I think we have, prior to this session, and we'll, following the session, share our handbook, but everything, all of our processes are documented and in our handbook. So it's worth checking that out if you haven't had a chance to yet. So we went through an iterative approach with all of our TAM team really contributing, and our TAM leadership as well, around defining what are some of these discovery questions. So taking best practices as we see them working with customers, as we roll this out more broadly, documenting those and making them available to others. So we continue to kind of build this central repository of scenarios and questions that work based on what we know customers are looking to achieve typically. We do a number of kind of team surveys, and then we use issues in GitLab to collect feedback on how things are working and iterate from there. So I think the key thing for us in all of this has been just starting somewhere, starting small and then iterating and building on that. But really a real GitLab value is just documenting everything to make it readily available to others. So you don't have to be on a call where you miss it, or in a room and you miss it. And that's been really key for us in being successful in rolling this out more broadly. And to your question, Amelia, how we believe we'll be able to scale this even further.
So if I hear you correctly, you really, it has to be from a higher level. Your leadership said this is part of the values that we hold ourselves accountable to, and that's documentation, and it's really helped you scale. Did I get that right?
Yes, well, transparency, yeah, and part of that is documentation, yeah, in an async environment. So through documenting things, you don't have to be in a room to catch the training. So we make this much more readily available for our broader team, regardless of location and time zones.
Yeah, and I would say that the other one that's been mentioned is iteration. That's a huge piece of, like, don't boil the ocean, just take a small iterate, and you can review, you can move quicker because it gives you feedback cycles for each iteration. So yeah, that's also a key value for us.
And so I think it's incredibly important to understand you're going through this iteration, there's urgency, you're scaling. How do you measure success in these situations?
Well, I think, oh, sure, do you want to?
Nope, that's fine, go for it. Yeah. I'll build on yours.
I think the interesting thing, I think it's really important when you're starting, you may not have data, you probably don't, right? So in some sense, you need to make a judgment call based on your experiences, feedback from the team, or leveraging content. Like Gainsight's got a ton of content. There's a lot of other sources where you can get guidance and content from. But a lot of what we did also is a lot of the work that's been done is establishing the ability to set up an operational framework with the processes and playbooks, but ultimately something you can measure. So one of the things that we started to define, especially related to onboarding, was start to go, okay, what do we want measures to be? And time to first value was one of those key things that we established. And we didn't have measures for it. So we just said, okay, here's what good looks like. You do these things, that means it's achieved. Over time, we're able to get product usage data, and now we're using actually license adoption for that first value measure. And we're going to continue and evolve. I think our next iteration is to try to right size it, so it's not a one size fits all license adoption, but if you have a 10,000 seat deployment, it's far different from 100 seat deployments. We're looking to evolve to get it to be a little smarter according to the type of deployment that's going to happen. But a lot of what we did is kind of establishing those measures across that whole life cycle.
Yeah, and then I think from establishing them and then putting the processes and the frameworks and the systems, most importantly, in this instance, in place, then we can track and begin to understand when a customer doesn't get to time to value within a certain time frame, what are the problems there? And we can begin to see customers that are going beyond those. It enables us to see, are the metrics correct? And if so, are they identifying challenge areas that we need to solve for? So potentially we have issues with handing over, maybe where we need to speed up that handover by automating certain points. Maybe we have issues with a customer who hits a particular roadblock around a third-party integration that we need to solve for more systematically. So being able to have these key points, such as time to value, and being able to understand when we miss and why has enabled us to solve for some of the customer challenges that we're now able to even see.
Yeah,
So
you can't improve something you're not measuring, right?
Yeah.
And I think what shares is really important, and I'll just reemphasize. You want to understand what your process is before you use the system. Is going to solve your problem, but the system will give you that visibility and be able to provide the metrics that you need. But don't assume a system is going to solve the problem. You have to address the process, the people aspect, and the system is a supporting part of the framework.
yeah, and I love this quote, you can't improve what you can't measure. So I'm curious, because for anyone on this call who's building their customer success enablement, their customer success teams, they're putting together an org structure. And David, you brought in Sherrod. I've had the pleasure of working with her, and I understand the scaling piece and how important it is to have people on your team, like administrators and operational people, to help with the implementation of technology and systems. What advice would you give the audience as the final question before we start taking some of these great questions? That, like, who do you hire? Where do you even start with putting these type of processes in place?
Totally. Well, I think you want to get the leader of your organization. For us, it's TAM. It could be a CSM, but like, I think that is probably the first thing you want to do. The second, and I'll actually use this as probably one of my mistakes, where I didn't bring in an ops person early enough. Because there's so much building to be done. There's process and systems and collaboration with a lot of groups, and you have to work with IT and the sales enablement. And I waited too long for that. And it ended up being like, it taxed the team, it taxed the leaders, it taxed me. So that would be my one advice. I mean, I think getting a leader in place is probably a no-brainer. And I think a lot of times there's pushback, and even that was probably my mistake. I was like, well, let me get to the certain scale before I get the ops person. But getting an ops lead was super helpful and accelerated a lot of things. So that would be my one suggestion.
What about you, Sherrod?
Something similar. I know that David's anecdotal of getting ops in early for sure has been a big piece. But yeah, so I would say something probably very similar, of just maybe tangential in just not being afraid of the small beginnings. So start somewhere. I think you can oftentimes come into data that is in Excel spreadsheets in a lot of different places, but just choose something. It can be more of an art than a science, and start there.
All right, well, let's take some questions. With 7 minutes left, I want to make sure we get through some of them. If you do have questions, please add them to the Q&A. And let's start with Anshi's question. Very interested in hearing your thoughts on what the top 3 things to continuously watch out for in onboarding phase. And this question's asked because it happens that you get carried away while trying to implement your strategy. But what is that will keep us honest within this process of building?
I think if I understand the question, I would say maybe intermixing onboarding with value. So the reason why we look at time to value is because we can tick all the boxes in what a good onboarding, as we have defined it, entails, and a customer hasn't yet perceived value, which is why we kind of moved to this time to value, right? So if onboarding happens seamlessly with all of the enablement content happening in within 45 days or 90 days or whatever it is for the size of your onboarding, but a customer still feels like they're not receiving value from the platform, then you're really not solving for the core thing that we're hoping to solve for with successful onboarding. So that would be one, is that onboarding doesn't necessarily equal value. So you need to understand where value lives within that framework.
Yeah, I'd also add another one is a seamless transition from the sales process into adoption. And by the way, I try not to use post sales because it makes me cringe. But I think the thing is, oftentimes the buyer is different from the person that's leading the adoption. So setting the expectations during that sales process to transition. And I noticed that was probably at least one of the key things, to getting customers to participate, engage. And we've seen that as well. And we're trying to make sure that expectation is set. Here's what we do, and let's identify who we should be working with now, and try to even get that process moving during the sales process, where it transitions smoothly. And ultimately, you can engage quicker. And we didn't talk about, our key measure is time to value, but we also talk about time to engage. So between the closure of the deal, how quickly can we get our first meeting? So there's other things you can set up, and we're actually tracking that. We're trying to compress that time of how quickly between the deal close and we actually have our first call with the customer. So there's things you can do of kind of going back to the, you can't improve what you can't measure, is put in some just basic things and start tracking them if it's an important thing for you.
And I would agree. I always, when I'm talking to sales leaders, I feel like I have to say post sales for them to understand what am I talking about. And then the minute I say, well, you know, all your conversion rates in sales, what about your conversion rate from handoff to time to value to adoption? What are your conversion rates? What are your metrics? And there's silence. So sometimes you have to use that word just so that they can understand the importance of customer success, or post-sales as they call it. So next question, with 4 minutes left, Sherrod, you mentioned the importance of success plans early on. Is this something that's an internal document only or shared with customers? And in either case, how is it captured? Like what system, or how do you share it with your customers?
Yeah, you bet. So we have, ours are somewhat twofold. So we have all of our success plans documented in Gainsight, and you can share them from Gainsight. So we do that piece. But because GitLab is an open platform, we also teach our customers to dog food through a customer collaboration project. So we kind of manage like the day in, day out task management with the customer there, whilst teaching them how to use GitLab. And then we manage the strategic framework, the key milestones, objectives, and progress against those kind of key business objectives in Gainsight, which is it creates a framework for us that we can report on that and then begin to scale that out and better understand, are we having these conversations across our customer base? So hopefully that answers the systems question, but yes, we share those plans with the customer and have mutually agreed outcomes with the customer.
And that speaks to your transparency value, right? And I just love that. So I want to get to at least one more question. What's one thing you two love in driving customer success at a hyper growth company like GitLab in comparison to other tech giants you might have been with?
I'll pick one. So I love the ability to move quickly, right? So I thought I moved quickly before. When I came to GitLab, there's a new definition of moving quickly. And a lot of it has to do with iteration and not trying to break up what you want to do into smaller pieces so you can move more quickly. So to me, that's the thing that's really exciting. And I'll actually give two. I also just love generally the balance of customer success in terms of helping humans, helping your customers be successful, like helping them develop software better, right? To help them be more efficient so they can be more creative. That is really inspiring. But also for GitLab, driving the results, driving that net dollar retention, and giving people careers. So I think that balance between helping the humans on the customer side and helping the humans on the team side are what really energized me.
If you'll entertain one more question, I think it's really important, and it's around defining time to first value. Is it a go live on the platform or something more defined around specific parts of the value proposition?
Sure.
I'll give you my 2 cents. Yeah, so I think it actually comes down to what the customer would receive as value. So for us, it's actually to do with a certain inflection point for license consumption. So once you've onboarded a number of users, and we'll continue to iterate on that and break it out via segments. But in previous companies, sometimes onboarding could take 6 months, and that was expected. So we would find little milestones within that. So maybe you're not completely onboarded onto the platform, but we're able to get this piece of the platform up and running for you. And so you kind of need to work with your customers to understand where they're going to receive value and then use that as the quickest path.
Okay, great. Now, David is telling me he's willing to hang on because there are a couple more questions. I'm going to leave the best one for last because it's pretty funny. So I'll just start with Matt's first. Are there some main pieces of the ideal success plan, such as identifying desired outcomes, executive participation, that is viewed as a formal agreement? Or is this a more casual structure to guide the relationship? And are you even putting it in a technology to track, or is it just maybe an email or checking a box that it's done?
So we do track everything in the success plans. We log the objectives up front and then progress against them and report back on them in the executive business reviews that we have. I would suggest that it is a formal agreement to the degree that it's not contractual, but I would suggest that it is, because ultimately if a customer is not getting to their desired business outcomes, they're not going to renew. So yeah, we don't put it in kind of in blood necessarily, but it's important that the customer sees progress against these.
And I would agree, when Sherrod and I worked together, if the executive wasn't at the executive business review at the end of onboarding, we canceled the meeting. If the executive wasn't signing off that they truly felt they saw impact from the relationship, you cancel the meeting, because you need to hear it from them and get that sign off.
Yep.
I have one last question, unless someone asks one more question. And David, I think it's for you. Why does the term post-sales make you cringe?
Oh, okay. This is a bit of my soapbox. So I think of post-sales in the perpetual software world, right? You sell them, and to some extent, the software provider is like, boom, done, bye, and disappeared. Maybe, you have a support renewal, but it's kind of a land and leave process, where in a SaaS motion, the closure of the transaction is both a start of an adoption, but also selling an expansion process. So you should look at, there's no stopping of sales, right? Because ultimately you want to drive adoption, you want to drive value and outcomes to the customer, which then yields where I view as the opportunity to drive more value and expansion and net dollar expansion with that existing customer. So I think it earns that right to continue driving those continual sales after the initial transaction. So I kind of call it the growth phase, or post initial transaction, which does not roll off the tongue. I agree. But I think it's something we need to look at. It's a start of the relationship, not something that has a marker and you post sell. So yeah, that's why it makes me cringe.
I love that. There's no stopping to sales, especially in the SaaS world. And with that, I feel like from a people perspective, I heard, and for the audience today, loud and clear, hire the right people and early on, so you're not in a firefighting mode. And then from process, put process in place and get leadership, your customers and your team behind the reason why and how it aligns to your vision and your values. And then from systems, have a central source of truth that you can show metrics that matter to your customers, so they're receiving impact from your relationship, and then your employees, so that they can focus on what matters, and that's relationships with your customers instead of doing monotonous work. So I'd like to thank everyone. David, one sentence to leave the audience with, and then you, Sherrod.
One sentence?
One sentence.
Well, I'll pick what I said. So I thank you. I really appreciate, I know everybody's time is valuable, and I really appreciate both the participation and the engagement with great questions. So thank you for joining.
Yeah,
Sherrod.
I'll reflect that. Hopefully you got the handbook link out of the chat from today, and I think we'll follow up with it as well. Please do feel free to reach out with questions. You can find both David and I on LinkedIn, of course, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation.
And we will put all of the show notes, the video, and resources that David and Sherrod have shared on simplifyingcs.com. And stay tuned. We will be having another show in a month. I feel like this conversation could have gone on for a lot longer. So thank you both for being our first guests on the show.
And thank you for having us.
All right. Bye, everyone.